I read last week? What did Comics Kid 2099 read last week? So I didn't read a lot of stuff last week. I spent basically the first half of the week rereading The Dark Knight Returns and then working on the review that I did of The Dark Knight Returns. And so after that, I was still in a Batman mood, but I wanted to kind of have a cool down from the intensity of The Dark Knight Returns. So I read the first 3 volumes of Batman 66, which was a comic book series that was based on the Adam West, Burt Ward Batman show from the 60s. And I had never read any of this series except for the Batman 66 Green Hornet crossover that I reviewed last December, but I wanted to wait. The reason that I waited so long on reading this series was because I am not very familiar with the Batman TV show. I grew up watching the movie that came out in 66, but I had never seen any of the episodes before until just recently, in the last few years, they put the entire series out on DVD. And I have season 1. I've watched a few episodes, but I haven't finished season 1. And originally, I wanted to wait on reading the Batman 66 series because I wanted to be a little bit more familiar with the TV series. But then I said, you know what, it's fine. It's going to take me a while to get into the Batman 60s TV show, so I'm going to read these 3 volumes that I have and see if it holds up for somebody who isn't very familiar with the TV show. And I think it does. I think if you don't mind Batman being a little bit campy, which is the word that is associated with the Adam West Batman, if you don't mind the campiness attached inherently to this premise, if you don't mind some pretty silly but extremely entertaining stories here, if you don't mind any of that, then you're definitely going to have fun. There are a lot of people who really have their heart set on Batman always being very serious, very dark, always grimacing about everything, never cracking jokes, or never just having fun. There are instances of Bruce and Dick going fishing, or going to a ball game, or sitting down and watching a TV show with Alfred and Aunt Harriet, and we don't get to see Batman do that kind of stuff in the main DC universe. And I think it's fun to get to see him loosen up a little bit and not always be taking everything so seriously. Yes, when he's fighting crime, he takes that seriously, but he can also live a little bit and kind of enjoy himself, and that's kind of interesting to see that here. There is one complaint that I have with this series, and it's something that might be fixed in later volumes. There are 2 subplots that are set up in what I've read recently that is not addressed in what I read. Now, this is only like 15 or so issues, so it's really not that long of a span of time, but it is a little vexing whenever I have these 3 volumes and I'm getting into it, and then there's a subplot set up, and then they don't follow it up. And after 15 issues, I don't know if they are ever going to follow it up. One of them, Barbara Gordon, she works in a library, and there's somebody else there, and he opens this occult book, and then something weird happens, and Barbara doesn't even see it. She's filing another book, and then she turns around, and the weirdness has stopped. But it's something, I don't know if a spell has taken over this guy's brain, or if he was reading a spell and he was performing a spell. I don't know. But at the bottom of the page, it says, this subplot might be followed up on later. It's like they're not even sure if they're going to follow that subplot up, and they don't in these 3 volumes. Now, they might later on, but the Batgirl stories were very few and far between here, and I'm assuming that's something they did in the TV show, where Batgirl would show up once in a blue moon. They may be kind of following suit with that here in the comic, where she will show up like once in each volume. So I have no idea if that occult book in the library that Barbara Gordon works at is ever going to show up again. I kind of feel like they should follow that up. If you're going to do a weird little side story that only takes 1 page and you're setting something up, you need to follow through with it. And then there's another issue where Lorelei, she is one of the villains from the TV show that I was unfamiliar with. There are actually several villains who show up here that I had never really seen much of before. I was aware of Egghead, played by Vincent Price, but I had never seen him before. He shows up a few times here. King Tut, who's a character who doesn't really show up that much in the main DC universe. I think there's one story where a version of King Tut showed up, but he's entirely different than the 60s version. But he shows up here. You get characters like Lorelei, the Sandman. There are characters who show up in this comic that I wasn't very familiar with. And there's one issue where Lorelei, she is performing in an opera, and Bruce Wayne happens to be on a date with Kathy Kane. I thought that was a nice little reference to a DC Comics character who, as far as I know, never showed up in the series. But anyway, Bruce kind of slips away with one of his excuses, and then Batman shows up to fight Lorelei, and she is able to drug him so that he is hallucinating while he's fighting her. And then we see that there's this mysterious man who is in the opera watching this whole thing happen. And he says something to the effect of, yes, my evil plan is working. And then, as far as I know, we never find out who that guy is. He looks a little bit like the Sandman, who does show up later, and he's not Morpheus or Wesley Dodd or the Sandman from the 1970s. He's not any of those versions. He is a villain who uses sand to put people to sleep. He shows up in a later story. He looks a little bit like this mystery guy who is watching the fight with Lorelei, except that we never bring up his possible alliance with Lorelei. They never mentioned that he was arming her with this special substance that drugs Batman, because they were kind of making a big deal about that. Like, who is it that was working with Lorelei? And then they never bring that back up. It looks a little bit like the Sandman, but it could not be the Sandman. It may not be, because each story is drawn by a different artist. And that is one thing I really liked here, where we are showcasing a whole bunch of artists who might not be chosen to draw an ongoing series because they're not very well known, or they might not even be chosen to draw a fill-in issue, but maybe they'll be chosen to draw an anthology series. Not really an anthology series, but it's a series with a single writer, Jeff Parker, and then there's a few issues drawn by or written by someone else who's not Jeff Parker, and I can't remember that guy's name right now. But then each issue will have an entirely different artist, and I think that's great for up-and-coming artists that people might not be familiar with. It allows their art to be seen by people, and this is, you would think, kind of a niche series that just a few people would be interested in, but this series was quite a bit more popular than I would have thought whenever this series first started, because not only did it last a good little while, like 30 or something issues, which is a long time in this day and age, but it also had several tie-in minis and is still having tie-in minis as far as I know. You had the aforementioned Green Hornet Batman 66 tie-in, which was something that I've already talked about before. There's been a crossover with the Man from U.N.C.L.E. I believe the Avengers, not the Marvel Comics superhero team, but Steed and Peel. I believe they have crossed over with it, but I'm not sure. And it feels like there was some other 60s show that they crossed over with. Maybe the Bionic Man or Bionic Woman, although I may be getting the Wonder Woman 77 comic confused with this. But anyway, this series still has life going past the original run of issues. So that's something that I'm very pleasantly surprised to see. But anyway, I really enjoyed these books. I don't have a whole lot to say about them other than if you are a fan of that type of lighthearted Batman, definitely check this series out. I don't know if these subplots that were introduced in the first 3 volumes are going to be picked up with later on. I hope so, because if you're going to have any continuity at all, you don't need to just abandon it as soon as you introduce subplots like that. I wouldn't mind if each issue is completely standalone, but they're not really doing that. They're kind of trying to have their cake and eating it too, and they need to go ahead and just have their cake and eat it too if they're going to do that. But anyway, I like this series. I will be reading more of it later on in the future. This was all that I had right now, these 3 volumes plus the Green Hornet crossover, which I already read. But anyway, I liked it, and I hope that you guys liked this review, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a, no, maybe not tomorrow, I don't know. I'll be back later in this week with another video. I'll see you guys later. Have a great rest of your day.